Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Convention of South Africa's Dialogue on Comprehensive Quality Education. My name is Paul Pillay, and I'm from Youth Lab, and I will be facilitating the conversation tonight. Joining me, we have three panelists, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves very quickly.
I'm Sihlemon. I'm from the University of Pretoria.
Tessa from Youth Lab.
I'm Pilar Rampili, co-founder of Reimagine South Africa.
So tonight we're going to be talking about comprehensive quality education. We know that the topic is very broad and there's obviously lots of different sub-themes the way it has been organized in previous discussions. And so what we want to do tonight is to focus on the higher education question, or rather the post-schooling education question. So what I want to start us off today with is a question about a picture of success. So if you think about a young person that's going through school, when they're finished with high school, what does a picture of success look like for them as it relates to post-schooling? So in your opening statements, that's the main question that I want you to answer. We'll start with you, Dr. Rampila.
My picture of success are young people who are graduating from high school, confident in their own skin, very well informed about what it means to be a citizen, what are their rights, what are their responsibilities, but also very informed about the value system of the society they live in, and able to look at their potential in terms of their talents and make the kind of choices of a place in the post-schooling system that will fit in with their talents. And that, for me, requires that in this high school, particularly towards the end of high school, we need to pay a lot more attention to preparing young people for the future choices they'll have to make. And those choices start with themselves as the agents of the kind of future they want to live in. And to do that, they need to be able to imagine and reimagine a future that would be different from the future that they're living in now. And I believe that our school system needs to be supported in that particular task, because the choices that young people make in terms of post-schooling are important choices that make for success or failure.
Great, thank you. Tessa?
Maybe I'll answer that question in two ways, and one will piggyback off Dr. Rampila's first comments. The idea that people have pathways and different pathways they can pursue is the first part of a picture of success for me. Right now, young people's ability to think about their future is limited by very few options. And so even if you have great talents and you have things that appeal to you, there are very, very few occupations in South Africa that really have a clear path to using your talents and your skills rather than pushing you in a particular direction. So I think the first picture of success is about one that gives you multiple options about how to get where you want to go, where you can self-determine the end result that you want to see for yourself. I think the second picture of success has to do with two things. One is the ability to see yourself making a living, not just having an occupation. And that's an important thing in South Africa. You can't think about going into post-schooling or post-school education without thinking about, where is this going to take me? You come from homes where people are putting you under enormous pressure to be able to contribute financially. And people are having to think about ways to do it almost immediately after they leave high school. So it must be a kind of education framework that gives people the sense that they know how they're going to translate their education into some kind of livelihood and income. And then the second part of the experience is that it must be one that rounds you enough that you're able to deal with your social context and understand what kind of South Africa you live in and how you're making that South Africa. And I think it's because that goes beyond the question about how you're going to feed yourself and your family. If all your education does is give you that, then it has robbed you of the ability to think of yourself as a whole person. And so it must give you a sense of who do you want to be in the kind of South Africa that you envision and you imagine? And what does it take to do that? So there must be competencies. When I think about young people who I've engaged with who are job hunting, for instance, one of the major things they struggle with is the sense that they have enough confidence to go into the world and present themselves and take on the world, because they don't understand the South Africa that they live in, and they don't understand how to navigate that South Africa. And I think a post-schooling education must give them some key social competencies that makes them confident to conquer the world.
Dr. Moon?
Well, in the first instance, I would like to see a situation where as many of the young people who started together in grade 1 graduate together. All right? And that we deal with the high dropout rate in our system. And obviously, after matriculation, we expect that the young person is confident, is competent, and has the skills and the resources to navigate the society that they're going into. But the way to do that doesn't start in high school, interestingly enough. It starts with a solid and focused and well-resourced ECD system, okay? Because we have now come to realize that our problems, or the problems for young people, start much earlier than the basic education level. They start much earlier than the post-schooling system. They actually start at ECD level, where we have not been able to, I think for too long, to invest the kind of resources that you need to invest in order to produce the kind of high school graduate you're looking for. It starts right there. Research suggests that early cognitive stimulation has a serious impact on success rate and success, not just in high school, but also beyond high school. A large number of our young people do not benefit from that early investment in ECD. So the work that we do suggests that we really need to see, we call it comprehensive quality education, because we feel that you need to start where you should start at the beginning, at ECD level. That's where you sort of set the foundation for a successful learner in high school, but also a successful learner beyond high school. So that would be the key success factor for me, getting the ECD system right and putting the kind of investments that you need to put in right at the beginning when the educational journey of the child starts. I think that's where we've been missing it for far too long.
Okay, so we're talking about capacitated, self-empowered young people who have gone through an ECD system that works and are able to then make empowered choices based on a variety of options available to them. So I want to go back a little bit to the ambition and the imagining question. The theme for these dialogues is to reimagine, redesign, and reorganize South Africa. So in talking about ambition and the ability to go beyond just what's placed in front of you, where does that shift begin? So young people are constantly told that, well, the job sector is manufacturing, and so people need to move into manufacturing. But if I don't want to be in manufacturing and I want to be a painter, where do we start encouraging and building a system where people can pursue ambitions rather than pursue jobs? Anyone can start.
Well, I think our view is that the kind of education and training system we envision is one that that prepares people for the labor market, but also one that prepares them for the ambitions they have in life, whatever those ambitions are. The system must be sufficiently dynamic. It must be sufficiently resourced and provide sufficient skills for you to make all sorts of choices you want to make about your future. It shouldn't circumscribe you, to being a teacher or a doctor, as the case was, I don't know, so many years ago. The labor market is so dynamic, it's ever changing, and the education system needs to, to be alive to that dynamism and in the labor market. It should be perfectly possible for you to graduate from a high school in Lenasia and, go abroad and work because you are sufficiently, capacitated and you have the skills to engage not just in the local labor market, but, the global labor market. So we're really looking for an integrated system, but one that is really dynamic and one that responds to the challenges of today, but also one that responds to the challenges of the future.
I think the key issue really is to expose people, and that's why it's so important to have that firm foundation in ECD, so that when young people get into basic education, they are not narrowly focused on what success looks like. Success could be being the best boiler maker in the country, the best electrician in the country, the best artist in the country. But our school system, our environment, both in the schools and in the homes and in the faith communities where young people are growing up in, need to be alive to the opportunities that we need to put in front of our children, so they know that the world is out there, is their oyster. They need not narrow their views. But to do that, we need to pay attention to the reality that ours remains a divided society, an unequal society, and to reinforce young people's sense of what's possible. As someone said, to democratize the sense of wonder, the sense of curiosity about what lies beyond where I've grown up, and what careers are possible. We know we are now growing, we're operating in an environment of multiple careers. So you can start off as a doctor or a whatever and end up being an artist or a dancer. And that openness is what we need to help young people to apprehend and to be prepared for.
See, the thing for me is the world in which young people are being taken into is not one that is dynamic. We don't have a South Africa that has a job market, a labor market, an entrepreneurial system that is about innovation and creativity and openness and different things. So I actually worry that we'll create young people who are innovative and driven and all of that, and that the moment they get into the system, they get shut down and get told, no, don't dream. Because even if you do, you're going to be cut down. You're going to be told there's not funding, or there's not this, or there's not that. And so we have to do both sides. You have to do the demand and the supply. You have to say that South Africa is ready to be the kind of place that is shaped and changed by the people it educates, rather than accommodates the people that it educates into what exists already. Unless you're willing to do that, and I don't think we're ready to do that as a society. There are too many people who have vested interests in the way things are right now. So if I, as businessman X, have been profiting off having a monopoly over the way in which furniture is made, why on earth would I encourage a society that's going to create somebody who's going to make furniture redundant? I wouldn't. And so those are the realities that we need to also face. Is there economic imperative and interests in society that don't want young people to be diverse, to be different, to break molds, to change things around. And unless we deal with that, we won't deal with much. The second issue for me is just responding specifically to where that reimagining and that rethinking starts. When I was 18, I was in a township called Alrado Park, and I didn't know much about the world outside myself. So I didn't understand what happens in terms of race relations, gender relations, anything in the country outside of a very narrow township environment. But the one thing that I did was I said to myself that I would not live the same life for 5 years in a row. Or like every 5 years of my life, I was going to look to do something different. And having that perspective pushed me. Because if I hadn't done that, I would never have allowed myself to explore things as they came. But I was only able to do that because I had an education and not only just my varsity education, but I had a mentor during my varsity days who was willing to walk me through the uncertainty of that journey, who was willing to cushion the uncertainty of the journey. And most South Africans, young South Africans, besides not having access to formal education after school, don't have the kind of supportive environment that can cushion an uncertain journey. So it's a structural issue about creating an environment that allows people to fail, allows people to, vacillate without them losing out financially or socially because of it.
You're right. I think a lot of it is a question about who's invested, right? Whose interests does where society is going right now serve? And are the people whose interests it currently serves, are they willing to let go of their interest a little bit in the broader benefit of everyone else? So we have some questions and comments from social media. And someone actually said, at Kuli Wachina on Twitter, said, when you go around Africa, it's incredible how people are doing things with their hands and doing it themselves, running small businesses. The university mentality is killing young people. Do you agree? Do you think that we're pushing young people into a specific mode of working and mode of thinking? And if so, how do we then break that? So talking about the people who have vested interests in particular markets, how do you bring in buy-in from other people beyond things like BEE?
I think that's why this whole conversation is taking place within the context of a national convention process, which is pushing a reimagined, redesigned, and reorganized society, where these issues, which are real, about vested interests, will be addressed. That's why, in addition to looking at comprehensive education, we're looking at a reimagined economy, a reimagined way in which citizens assert themselves as the anchors of democracy. We are looking at healing a society which has been crippled by this narrow focus on, for you to be successful, you've got to have a university degree. Why? The rest of the world has known all along that only a few people really benefit from going to university. The majority of people benefit from having very targeted skills development, but what's important is the foundation, which enables you to do what is described, this kind of every 5 years or every 10 years, whatever you decide, this flexible career path. But you've got to have as a foundation confidence, and a mind that's willing to explore different things, and an environment which encourages that. And that is why we need to look at a comprehensive education that is reimagined within a reimagined society.
Yes, it is true that there is a perception in our country, and unfortunately it finds expression among our parents, our teachers, and society generally, that success is equal to a university degree. And in doing so, we lose out on a real possibility of allowing young people to, express their creativity in so many other different ways. Vocational education and training, and, practical skills is a huge possibility which we have not sufficiently explored in this country. Because it is true that a carpenter makes sometimes more money than a doctor if you run your business, intelligently. There's also the real possibility that as a carpenter or a boiler maker, you can actually run your own business, be an entrepreneur, so that you have your future in your own hands. So we still have a lot of work to do. Part of our reimagination and reorganization exercise is to really work hard to change the perception and talk more about post-school that post high school possibilities should be endless. University should only be an option, one of many, several options, but there should be other options. The vocational education and training option is one that I really think we haven't sufficiently explored. So this is part of what we, this is part of the pipeline, right from ECD level, basic education, TVET, higher education, up to the labor market, because it is only with an effective reimagined education and training system that we are going to really start shaking this labor market.
Yeah.
It doesn't look very differently from what it was, 20 odd years ago. So part of the struggle is to get an appropriate education and training system so that we change, we really truly transform the face of our labor market. We also transform the dynamics as to the racial dynamics as to who's poor in this country. It is unacceptable that 20 odd years post-democracy, the face of poverty remains black in this country. And we suspect that a good education and training system could take us somewhere in dealing with that anomaly.
So, thinking about other places on the continent, I lived in Ethiopia for a while, and something that struck me, and I think I've seen it in a few other countries, but because I lived there, I have very specific memories of walking down streets, and every store could literally sell the same thing. But people didn't feel overwhelmed by the idea that 3 doors down, somebody's also selling brooms. They were willing to put themselves out there, number one. They were willing to take charge of that. So even if it meant that I need to be hyper competitive, if I saw that somebody's going to buy brooms and I think I could sell brooms better, I'm going to sell brooms better. In South Africa, we closed down opportunities to do things so easily. The idea of getting airtime, for instance. I used to get airtime on a street corner. I knew there were street corners, and you could figure out where you're going to get your airtime on a street corner from a young person who may never have seen the inside of higher education institution. And that was their living. So am I saying that everybody should become an informal trader? No. But I'm saying that being an informal trader should be something that somebody can imagine themselves doing, and being able to figure out the social skill and the entrepreneurial skill it takes to do it, even if they're going to do it for 6 months, as a way to step over to another thing that they're going to do. And so it's almost kind of, to use the religious phrase of not despising the days of small beginnings kind of stuff. Like, allow people to do, even if it's the small things that work, and the things that don't require you to be inside formal education, because that's the other thing about post-schooling, is debunking the idea that you have to be inside formal education in order to learn. There must be ways in which our society teaches skills and transfers skills outside of formal learning that are also useful in ways that people can earn a living, especially in a climate where we're still trying to figure out the mechanics of ensuring that schooling is affordable for everybody. Because that's a worthwhile thing to pursue, but until then, being in your society should be enough to teach you at least some basic things that should be able to keep you going. There are way too many communities in our country where seeing young people who are on street corners just hanging around waiting for something to happen, because probably at their home they have parents who are also sitting at home waiting for something to happen. There's too much of that. And we need this, the psyche needs to change about, we need to find informal ways to start getting things happening. That's the reason why an imagination of a West African country that is bustling and busy, and I mean, to be completely provocative, the difference between some township areas and Hillbrow, just the feel of it's busy, 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 and most of the people there don't even have an official reason to be busy. So there's something about a mindset shift that needs to happen, and we also need to, as young people, take accountability for that.
I agree. I think maybe to talk about a how a little bit and get a bit practical. So I'm happy that you mentioned vocational training. Miss Diko on Twitter actually said, does the job market actually want TVET qualifications, and how do we improve their quality first? So in reimagining a question about value, right? So we have long said that university is not for everybody and that university isn't the only way to success. So what are the practical things that we can do to show young people that there are other options that are equally as valuable as a university, but also how do we improve the quality of those options so that they actually become real, sustainable options?
Look, in our quest to reimagine the vocational education and training space, we have come to understand that for any TVET system to succeed, you need the private sector to be at the heart of it. Because you are training people not for the sake of it, not for certificates. You're training them in preparation for the job market, all right? And it is the private sector that will employ them. So part of what we're trying to canvass is to get each TVET institution supported by the private sector in terms of the curriculum, in terms of the equipment and the machinery they keep, so that the machinery is updated. The labor market is like your iPhone, okay? If you get trained on the iPhone 1 and you get trained, I don't know, for 3 years, by the time you get into the labor market, everybody's using iPhone 8, right? The way to ensure that the machinery in the TVET system is updated and that kids get trained on machinery that is relevant outside in the labor market is to get the business intimately involved in the process. They need to support getting new updated boilermakers. They need to come in and help with the teaching. They must avail their workplaces for students to walk between class and the workplace so that they have the experience. So by the time they come out of these TVETs, they are ready, really practically ready for the workplace. Now, part of the problem we see is that in the past 10 years, we'll probably still continue building lots of TVET colleges all over the place. All right? It's a good thing. It keeps our young people engaged, but it's not sufficient. We've not focused on the quality. We've not focused on the impact of the training. We've not focused on the outcome, okay? So part of the obsession we have in this process, SACC-led process, is to really focus on the quality of the training. We are desperately concerned and working hard to attend to the skills and competences of the lecturers in the TVET, because a TVET is not a school. Okay, it teaches people practical skills. All right, so it is important that the lecturers or the teachers in these TVETs are themselves, people who have been to the workplace, who have actually seen what a boilermaker looks like. So these are the kinds of interventions we're looking at to ensure that TVETs are truly attractive options, alternatives to other possibilities, but also because the private sector is intimately involved in the TVET, they will respect the product and the certificate that comes out of these TVETs.
I think there is also an untapped resource, which is the SETA system,
Yes.
which is also dangling in the air. It's not nested within a practical environment where young people can do these learnerships, not in terms of theory, but in terms of practice, of being put into working spaces where they can see what is the difference between an electrician, a plumber, a pavement maker, or whatever. What are the options that they can have access to? A lot of money is going into the SETAs, But what we have tended to do is to focus on the certificates that people come out with. Instead of certificates, let's focus on the skills. Let's focus on the sense of completeness that young people will feel coming out of a space where they have learned something and they can implement that. And it need not be, as has been said before, in all of the time in a formal sense. You can start your own business, or you can work with somebody else who's bringing different skills, and the two of you can actually do amazing work. One of the unfortunate realities of South Africa is that this unequal society of ours has huge backlogs in terms of social and physical infrastructure. And yet we've got unemployment. It really is a tragedy of missed opportunities. Because if you put together the need to upscale our infrastructure, both urban and rural, with the need for young people to get on-the-job training and practical skills that will help make our country ready to be that inclusive, creative, and prosperous democracy, we need to put these things together. And that's very practical, and we talk about doing it. And let's hope that this new focus on dealing with the issue of land restitution will not just be about ticking boxes, but it will be about how do we make urban land, rural land, productive and a firm base for people to have sustainable livelihoods.
Yeah, I mean, the TVET question is a hard one. I think, not hard because I think it's problematic, but because the mindset shift has got so many places that needs to happen. Employers need to value TVETs more. Young people need to value TVETs more. The government needs to value the TVET space more in terms of what it can do and what it can produce. My sense about TVETs is that it's really the most underdeveloped part of our system. We just aren't doing enough. And I would add to what's been said by saying that the social sector could benefit from the TVET colleges, probably in a new and innovative way more than any other sector. We have a lot of people and young people around the country who do volunteer work and do all sorts of things that they don't get skilled to do. And a TVET could skill them in basic things like there are trades like auxiliary social work, occupational health officers. All of this is happening in kind of private colleges and little corners and hooks and nooks and crannies, as opposed to just happening in TVET colleges and pushing those young people out into those vocations in the social sector that needs it.
Whose responsibility is that?
It's first and foremost, it is the Department of Higher Education and Training's responsibility to look at the landscape of education, what it does produce and what it puts out. But I also think that there's not been a lot of lobbying from young people themselves about how they want their education to look. And I think the more we speak to young people about what it is that they would want to learn, and the more they lobby around what they want to learn, the better our education system could be. Given that I think, government will continue to do what government does until there's an imperative from the outside. And I think young people should be the first place that imperative is pushed from. And then, of course, then the private sector and other players become important. But young people need to start setting an agenda.
Whilst I agree that young people need to set the agenda, which they've done traditionally, I think there is also a responsibility for my generation and the generation after ours as citizens to insist on a reimagined and redesigned and reorganized education system so that we can have those opportunities open, not just for the benefit of young people, but for the benefit of society to prosper. There is also the responsibility of the faith community. That's why I think that South African Council of Churches is opening up opportunities, particularly for young people in rural areas where they won't have the opportunity to understand a whole lot of things. The churches, the mosques, the temples, the synagogues ought to be places which give opportunities for young people. So we are all responsible.
Okay. I want to actually talk about accountability in addition to the responsibility question. So how do we hold these players accountable? So the idea about the private sector being as involved in TVETs as you suggested is a brilliant one, but there's nothing that compels the private sector to do so. So who do we hold accountable for the ideas that we have and their lack of implementation?
It's a citizen responsibility. The quality of any democracy is determined by the quality of citizenship. In this country, we come from an environment where we wait for government to do this. And we have waited even post-1994 for things to happen from government. We have not, as South African citizens, taken ownership that this is our democracy. We are, in a sense, the shareholders of this democracy. And to the extent that we stand up to say, this is the South Africa we want to live in, and this is how we would like the education system to function within this, and this is how we would like to see all the other sectors functioning. And we have the power in our hands in terms of the vote. We are not using the vote as an effective tool to hold those in government accountable. And we keep voting for the same people, doing the same things, and then we complain. We need, as South African citizens, to assume our responsibility of holding government accountable, as well as the private sector. What's going on in the private sector is also not acceptable.
The South African Council of Churches, like everyone else in the country, was shocked by the happenings in our country in the past few years. And in their analysis of what went wrong, they came to the conclusion that we actually let our guard down. We lost our activism, we lost our agency as citizens in the country. So part of the drive behind this initiative is to mobilize as many citizens in the country as possible to help them focus in taking their future into their own hands, and not allow anyone, any political party, any individual to ever again hold the country at ransom, as we have had in the past several years. I mean, none of us voted for corruption. None of us voted for state capture. None of us voted for all these ugly things that have transpired in our country in the past few years. And had we been alert, had we not let our guard down, we would have been able as citizens in the country to stop that, to prevent it from happening in the first place. So the Council of Churches is then saying, never again should that be allowed to happen. Citizens have it within their power to hold government accountable, but also to mobilize the widest range of participants in society to remain alert, to ensure that our country move in the direction that we sought it. We sought the country to move into, in 1994. That direction has been derailed, and it's only the citizens in the country that can bring us back online.
So I take the conversation in a slightly different direction in terms of what citizens do, right? We now talk about the fourth industrial revolution and the tech revolution. That did not start with a government initiative. The ways in which the need to educate people around tech happened is it happened through young people who were willing to do their own thing and start a parallel universe that created value and created demand and brought the private sector by force to their table because they could mobilize masses of millions of people across the world. So if you think about the social media revolution, big corporations were not even aware of what was going on until it was more valuable than they could possibly handle. If you think about, similarly in Kenya, the M-Pesa revolution, the ways in which, it didn't work here, but the ways in which the banking system was challenged by M-Pesa brought people to the table. And so what we need to do in South Africa is start doing things that work for us. So if going to the private sector to go and look for a job is not working for us, then clearly we need to find an alternate path that forces them to come to where we are. There are 66% of the population under the age of 35. So we have the numbers, clearly. So if all of those people under 35 are potential customers and consumers, that buying power alone should be able to bring the private sector to us.
Great. Well, so we've reached the end of the conversation, and to close, I want to take us back to the beginning. So we talked about what we would imagine a successful quality comprehensive education system to look like. So to close, I'm going to get to each of you, and I want you to tell me 3 things. The first is I want you to tell me what value system you think we need to reimagine, to tell me what system we need to redesign, and to tell me what group of people need to reorganize. So in keeping with reimagine, redesign, and reorganize, you're going to tell me what value needs to be reimagined, what system must be redesigned, and which group of people needs to reorganize.
The value system that we signed up for in 1994 of a human rights, social justice, fair, equal society, that's the value system. Mm-hmm. But we also have the great opportunity, being Africans, with a very deeply embedded Ubuntu, which captures all of what is in the Bill of Rights. So that's the value system we need to be pushing. What needs to be redesigned is the way we attach value. What kind of education system do we want to see? So what needs to be redesigned is the purpose of education. Mm-hmm. And how do we reorganize it? We need to reorganize it starting today. Each one of us has the capacity to reimagine and also to make sure that what happens is against the values and the standards of that value system that we talked about. And that needs to be the homework of each and every one of us.
Great, thank you. Sila?
Equality. We certainly need to pay focused attention on inequality. But I also think that we need to take another look at the post-1994 transition prospectus. Okay? There are way too many continuities. All right? And we need to pay attention to those continuities because we need to break with the past. A lot of today looks like yesterday. Yeah. In the education and training system, in all other various areas. We need to take our past needs to be further and further away from us. For me, that is key. And the education and the quality education and training system that we're talking about is one way of going about that. We need to train and produce a different citizen in the country. The next generation certainly needs to have a completely different experience to what we have had.
Thank you. Tessa?
So the value that must change is agency. And by that I mean when somebody wakes up in a rural area in South Africa, they should be able to make what they do every day what they want. They mustn't need to look for another version of reality in order to do what they want to do in their lives. So you should be able to wake up, self-determine what you want to do, and do it in the context that you live in. So what system needs to be changed? Pathways. We have to go from single pathways and double pathways to multiple pathways to success. And who should do it? Young people. We have the mass to disrupt. We should use the numbers we have to disrupt systems.
Thank you. Thank you for your inputs tonight. I think there's been a lot of food for thought, particularly around, when you think about education system, it's not often that people think about values and empowerment. It's usually about curriculum and fees. So I'm glad that we're able to have a conversation that tries to reimagine how we value an education system, but also what kind of society that education system is supposed to produce. So thank you for your inputs. And thank you for joining us, and we look forward to more conversations.